Hello all, welcome back. Scotch on the balcony. Today is 15th of August. I hope everyone is well. Just myself here today. Harry, no Alan today. Sadly, still under the weather. So today's episode, an eye for an eye. Before that, get in contact, let me know what you think, or if you have any thoughts about next week's episode. So an eye for an eye. Alright, so an eye for an eye is it's a simple form of, I suppose, justice. Based on retribution. You do something, well, that gives me the right to do it back to you, and that's fair enough. Obviously, that has its issues. There's no nuance. I think we're seeing that today in the world, and especially on the social media world. Nuance is gone, and people are just looking for excuses to use an eye for an eye, I suppose, in a weird way. So there's not, I couldn't really feel anything for the title an eye for an eye, except with Laurie's case. I suppose you could argue that the defendant in that case was looking for some sort of retribution, or mirrored retribution, I suppose, is what an eye for an eye is. So you do it to me, I do it to you, and maybe a little bit more. And as we know, that's not really any basis for any positive society. And yet, it seems to be spreading a little bit. Now, I did have a weird week this week, and I suppose it was a little bit of an eye for an eye that I've had to deal with this week, in that somebody in my life kind of brought to the front some of their actions towards me, and I had to deal with that and decide what to do. Now, I'm still going down the road of not going for an eye, but I still have to figure out how to deal with that. Trying to do it in a positive way, time will tell. Now, what I do have to say about this episode is that it's definitely the funniest episode with the most humour written into it. One of the most humorous overall. So what do we have in this episode? Obviously, we have the humour. Okay, we have a little bit of privilege, which I'm going to talk about from the first scene. Okay, then we have Laurie, her continuing arc from the last episode into this episode. Then we have the whole thing with Sally and Alan breaking up, how they're dealing with that. And then obviously Tara has put herself into that frame. Then we have the three cases. We have one case dealing with a hypochondriac. We have the second case, obviously, which is Laurie's case, which is the homicide. And then we have a third case in relation to medical overbilling. Bilking is what it's called here. And that's my new word I learned this week, was bilking, which is the obtaining or withholding of money, either unfairly or by deceit, cheat, or defraud. I always find it funny when I see a description of something beside deceit, cheat, or defraud, and you see unfairly, because whether something is fair or not is subjective. Apart from the fact that I think we can all agree on that life isn't fair. Well, that's what I tell my kids every day anyway. Well, most days. And even though we don't have a balcony scene per se in this episode, we do have two, I suppose, similar scenes. One with Laurie and Paul, and then obviously the final scene with Alan and Denny in the jail cell. So, where do we start? Okay, well, let's start with a bit of the humour. So we see the humour in the first scene, where Alan and Tara and a hooker have got arrested, and they're in costume. Alan as Batman, Tara as Robin, and then the hooker as Catwoman. Now, I found this very interesting straight off the bat, that Tara was as Robin and not Catwoman, as probably would have expected. She's putting herself out there for Alan, partner in crime. Alan's costume is obviously not like Batman. It's extra blue. It's got the extra muscles on it. And obviously has the extra long pointy ears. Don't think we have to say too much about what that's all supposed to mean. Especially as he's coming out of a breakup. So this kind of links in a little bit to Alan and how he's dealing with the breakup. It shouldn't be seen too negatively or too badly, because this is what most men do. We deal with things differently to women. So after a breakup, we deny ourselves going through it all. We just put it to the side. We get on with things. We delve ourselves into something. So we see Alan here is delving himself into a bit of humour, a night out, a bit of naughtiness, and that's what he's doing. It'll look after itself, and that's what most of us do as men in those situations. We put it aside, and we see differently that Sally, in my experience, is that most women, they don't do what Alan did, and they're still dealing with it. And even though it was Sally's decision, and she was right to do so, she's still dealing with the pain and stuff like that, and she deals with it head on. We do it differently. We just, it'll deal with itself. Let's kind of keep her preoccupied. And we see that later on when he says in his job that he's bored. He wants more exciting cases. He wants homicides or men pissing in corners or whatever. He just wants something. Take his mind off it. The weird thing I did think now and again, if any women are there listening, you can let me know if this is normal. Working within the one office, that literally straight away, and Sally does say it about Tara engaging, I suppose, in the chasing of Alan. Would that be normal? My experience is working in offices and men that wouldn't. I mean, you could say, well, what about Alan and Brad? Well, the thing is that Alan got together with Sally, didn't know about Brad. But Tara and Alan, who obviously have history, but also are similar, I suppose, kindred spirits in a way. Whereas, as discussed before, Alan and Sally are not a good match. I suppose there's a bit of a connection here between Tara and Laurie, a little bit. I think maybe Tara is looking to connect with Alan, whereas obviously Laurie's looking just to connect. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm just grasping at straws there. But we do see that Tara does have a plan, but kind of gets a little bit right when it comes to Alan, that he has a good side, a bad side, and a naughty side. But you could say that with all of us, that we all have different sides, good, bad, serious, naughty, whatever. She's obviously tried it before. Now she's going to go at it with a different tactic. But at least we know that Tara is going in with her eyes open. Don't think we could have really said that about Sally. But at least with Tara, she's an adult, she's a big girl. And like I said, a lot of humour, a lot of fun going on there. And again, that's something else that we do when we come out of something serious, whether it's a relationship or something like that. We deal with it with humour. We make a joke of things sometimes, rightly or wrongly. And I know I have that argument with one of my daughters and my wife at times, that look, not everything is a joke. Maybe I should be a bit more understanding that maybe there's a reason that they just don't want to take certain things maybe as serious as I am, or as I do, because I can be pretty serious, too serious at times. My favourite moment in the show from a humour point of view was definitely Laurie and Sally going to see the defendant's mother with the glass eye. I thought Laurie was very funny in that, and that's Monica Potter. Pissed myself laughing watching that. It's very funny. Followed by Denny, because Denny obviously does bring a lot of the humour to the show when he's talking to the judge, giving him shit, and then telling him he's gone to sleep with his wife. And then obviously when he gets put in the cell, he goes, yeah, put me in the cell with Martha, who's obviously his wife. I'm taking it. Again, dealing with serious things with humour. But that's something that we do, that men do a lot more so. There's a certain type of sense of humour that can seem degrading if you don't get it, if you're on the outside, can seem harsh. It's not meant to be. So there's another thing from the very first scene. So we have Alan and Tara, who are done for basically vandalising cop's car and then throwing eggs at them and so on. Now I wonder whether, if it was just you or I that were up in front of a judge, whether we would be let go. But Alan was let go because he knows the judge. And even though the judge gave him crap, saying he brings the legal industry into is an embarrassment and shame to it, he was still let off. Now let's be honest, that's privilege. Now I have an issue with the way the word privilege is being used. Privilege used to be a good thing. Not all the time, but a lot of the time it was a privilege. You know, you would if you would help someone out, you would say it was a privilege, or you were doing something with somebody, it was a privilege. But these should be something to attain to. Now it's deemed, whether it's white privilege or class privilege or whatever, you know, it's a negative privilege that two people work their ass off so they can send their kids to college or give their children opportunities. To some, it's even a privilege now if both your parents are together. It's a privilege. Well, you know what? I think we need to make the word privilege a positive thing again, to make it a good thing. These are sometimes good things. And putting yourself in a position, whether it's, you know, getting a job-wise, whether you're a lawyer or a doctor or whatever, gives you certain perks. Well, yes, but that's just the way it works. The world isn't equal. It's not possible for everyone and everything to be equal. That's just the way it is. Now, we can do better. I'm not saying we can't. We got to keep striving and pushing to be better and to make things fairer. Like I said before, whether something is fair or unfair, well, that's subjective. I do feel a lot of the times when we say something is unfair, it's a point of envy. I wish I could do that. It's not fair, is it? But that's just the way it is. We got to push, strive to be better. And by doing that, I think we need to make ourselves better and not drag people down. Giving somebody shit because they got a job or an opportunity, because they knew someone or their father knew someone. I'm talking about getting an opportunity now. Well, that's just the way it works. Sometimes we get opportunities through who we know, not just what we know. Being in the right place at the right time. And if person A can't put themselves in that position and person B can, well, not everybody can be in that position. As I said before, life isn't fair. Life is a struggle. Too hard at times. And that's where we have to strive to be better, I suppose. That's all I'm trying to say. So, back to the cases. Very quickly. So, Alan and Tara have the hypochondriac case. And I suppose the cases, again, this can sometimes fly under the radar because of what's going on with the characters in the episode. But here we have a guy who is obviously a hypochondriac. And I think this throws up questions, which is why I think this is the best show. And the question here, I think, is, well, what do you do with someone? So you go to your doctor because you have a problem. And figuring out what that problem is step one, and then what to do with that is step two. So it would appear in this case that the doctor, it was 38 times, I think he said, came to him. And Alan correctly answered, well, hold on a minute, what did you do? What did you recommend? That brings back the question of how health and illnesses, whether it's physical or mental, are dealt with. I have arthritis, I have asthma issues, and I have mental issues. And one of the things that my doctors only told me, which I'm really only now in my mid-40s really taking seriously, because I had a good doctor. I say had because he's retired now. And I'm trouble finding a good doctor in my locality, who actually seems to care. But he always told me, he says, look, you got to lose weight, you got to get fit, So he pushed these things on me. And I wonder whether that should have been pushed even more, whether doctors should do that. Should say, well, hold on a minute, the onus here is on you. You have to get fit and healthy. I think we've seen that during COVID. Hasn't been much talk out of governments about getting people healthy. I think this was the perfect time for that to be pushed. And yet we have this movement of, because of body shaming and stuff like that. Okay, we've gone too far that we have this whole push to say that people who are unhealthy physically and stuff, you can't say anything now. Well, how can you turn around and say, well, the word is that if you're of a certain size, if you're morbidly obese, that's okay, you're healthy. Love your body and be healthy. Well, no, I'm sorry, but there are certain circumstances have to be able to turn around and say to people, listen, you need to do better here. Human beings, if we're going to be honest with ourselves, I look for any reason not to do stuff. That's why at 46, the first time I'm getting my body in shape. I've mentioned before, I've stopped drinking. These are things that I could have and should have done a long time ago, but I didn't. I looked for excuses, and we do that when we're young, because I was talking about this with someone the other day that, when we were young, we think we're immortal. I look around and I still see people who are old, still are, they'll say, oh no, I'm going to die. Yeah, but you're not acting like you're going to die. We find those stories that are the exceptions to the rule and think that's us. That's not us. So in this case, we had a doctor who was taking advantage of a guy that was coming 38 times and paying for it. Like I said, I have that issue at the moment trying to find a doctor, because the doctor I had sold its clinic because he was retiring. Fair dues to him. But the clinic that I've gone to, they're more interested in people with the medical card. The medical card is a government card that you don't have to pay for shit. I don't have one of those because myself and my wife, we have a job. So the clinic is really only interested, or at least I put to the forefront, people with medical cards. Now, why is that, I wonder? Well, because they're going to keep coming back and back and back. Like, if you think about this, doctor's job is to get you better. Well, that means you're not going to be coming back. Now, on an individual basis, that's wrong to say that, because the majority of doctors I know, and I've spent time with and talking to, don't have that attitude. But you have to admit, it's an industry, the medical industry. It's less interested in a cure and more interested in dealing with sick people. As they say, it's not the health service, it's the sick service. So Alan obviously wins his case. But if you were to believe what he was saying, and we give the plaintiff benefit of the doubt here and say that he did have a mental illness, and it's because of all this information that was thrown at him. He was saying when he went to the library, this guy thinks went to Dr. Google or the equivalent of it at the time, and he goes, oh, I have that, so maybe I have that, or this or that. It doesn't matter what it is. A doctor I know, she once told me that, medicine is an art. There's an art to it of trying to figure out what's wrong with someone, because everyone is different. And if you remember, one of my favourite doctor shows, Dr. House MD, he says in the very first episode, near the start of it, he says, people lie. And we do. We lie, and we lie to ourselves more so. But in this case, Camilla, was obvious. This guy had a mental issue. And the doctor didn't do anything about it. He just did that thing we all do. It's someone else's responsibility. Why? Because it's hard to deal with that. And B, it's not in his vested interest, I suppose, from a money point of view. But then also there is a suing issue that they have, that if they get it wrong, they're going to be sued. So, by turning around and telling someone they're not actually sick, well, you run the risk of saying, what if they are sick? Shit. Now, that's not what happened here. Went too far. Come on, 38 appointments and, the office mascot, more like the office bonus. And that kind of links into Denny's case. We don't learn a lot about because it's more about Denny than anything else. But this is where we have an overbilling issue. Like I said, bilking, a word I learnt. So what we have here is that a sick person comes in, they're charged full price against their insurance. Their insurance pays the full price, whether it's equipment or whether it's medicine supplies. But the medical company charges them at a discounted price. And basically, the medical company gets a cut of that. So everybody makes. And in this case, they were saying, well, the older people were getting charged more, maybe because of insurance. So whatever, I don't know the exact details of how, but that was the general gist of it. Now, you could turn around and say that's wrong, that the parts should be billed out, or the materials should be built out as the cost that came in. Okay, that's a very, and usually I am against this, but you got to look at the bigger picture here, because I know this from the motor industry that this happens a lot, like a lot. Lease companies, hire companies, insurance companies themselves, there's a bill there and it's not the real bill. And it is fraud. Or is it? Is it fraud if you know about it, but you can't do anything about it? Like, is it wrong when figures are being agreed for a job that an insurance company will screw the garage over their labour costs, for example? But then the garage will charge out the full retail cost of parts. But they could be getting anything between a 10 and 30% discount. Is that wrong? Well, one kind of is historically supposed to take over and balance out between one and the other. And insurance companies were okay with that because the idea was to keep the labour rate down across the board. And they made a saving from that. So the correct way should be that the labour cost should be much higher, and then the parts and materials supplies get charged out at whatever they paid for them. But now we have, in today's world, at least where I live, in the world I'm in, you have insurance companies that want to screw the labour, want discounts on that, but also want the discount that the garage is getting. So, but this is the game. And you could argue that certain companies have to do it within that world just to make some profit. Now, where it's hard is when you see the profits, the amount of profits that are being made by medical supply companies and by some private hospitals and by members of the industry. That's where the problem is. But we live in a free market, so how do you deal with that? We deal with it by having better regulation. But if you're going to do it, you've got to do it across the board. That's the problem. So in an effort to balance, you have, I don't know whether it's a case of Peter taken from Paul. Again, this is where we have to strive to be better. And even within that case, we see the games that go on within the legal industry in relation to heel dragging and Denny getting a mistrial and all this shit. Like I said, what's fair and what's true when we get to these levels sometimes of civil cases, that's gone out the window. And it's just a game, it's a battle. And that brings us on to Laurie's case, which is a homicide case. Now, I can relate to the defendant in this. He got beaten up by two guys. One of them was the guy that died. And as he says himself in the room with Laurie, it wasn't the fact that he got beaten up, it's the fact that he didn't defend himself. I think a lot of us can relate to that in some stage in our life. And sometimes it gets to a point where we just have to turn around and say no more. And that's what the defendant did in this. He went off, learned taekwondo, self-defense, and then put himself in a situation, I suppose, to undo the damage that was done. Something tells me this wasn't the only time this had happened to him when he got beaten up. I'd say it was continuous, going back to his school years. I can relate to that. School was not good for me. took me a long time. And I'm still dealing with it through life. I didn't know how to deal with it in school. That continued into my work life until I just went, no more. But yet there's still that part of me that has an issue with confrontation. I'm working on it, but it's still there. And that's what he did here. Don't know if he meant to kill him in this case. I think it's shown maybe to indicate that he did or he wanted to. Maybe didn't intend to, but wanted to kill him. Definitely see that from the mother. Bit of a side note connection. Monica Potter, plays Laurie, was also in Con Air. And in Con Air, her husband in that got himself into a fight. Trained soldier, ranger, I think. Not the same, but similar, I suppose. Difference in this case is that Nicolas Cage went to jail and Laurie got this guy off. But it does call into that question, what is the right thing here? It's kind of indicating that he should have went to jail, that he meant to do it. But is this him just dealing with what went before? And in an effort to overcome that, instead of maybe going obviously a different route, ended up killing someone. And he still has that thing in him, as we see when he looks at the other guy. What I thought was interesting was that guy that he killed, who had beaten him up 4 years previously, we don't know much about him, whereas the other guy that was involved, he kind of admitted he was wrong about it. He wasn't that type of person anymore. Maybe this wasn't the case. We don't know. We don't have this information. Did he deserve to die? And that's the eye for an eye thing. But again, that's why I love Boss Nigel. It throws up these questions. Where's the line? Where's the black and white? Where's the grey? Obviously didn't deserve to die. Deserves something maybe. I don't know. What do you think? What we can see is that Laurie, in an effort to connect with people, not too dissimilar actually to her defendant, that she purposely put herself in a situation where she had to face up to something. In the last episode, when she was speaking with the defendant in that case, she was talking about rules and regulations. She wasn't in it for him, that kind of thing. But out of that, there was some sort of a connection to the person that she was defending, and she was looking for that. Because she was dealing with civil cases, but as Paul said, there's a difference between civil prosecution, which I think there was a mention she was in the DA's office, so maybe that's what she was doing before, and civil defence. Criminal defence. And she wasn't happy, but as Paul says, I think he says, I know you, to Laurie, that this wasn't going to go well. And obviously it doesn't, because at the end of it, she's questioning herself, because she got a murderer off. And that's what it looks like. I know I'm hemming and hawing, but I think, look, the guy killed someone and should have went to jail, I think. And Laurie's not happy with that. She's struggling with that, in that effort to connect, to try and figure out who she is. There's something missing. So in the first part of the two sort of balcony scenes, I suppose, the two moments of honesty, we have Laurie and Paul. So even though Paul says congratulations, we can see Laurie is not deeming it to be a congratulatory situation. She ain't happy. I wonder if Paul should have told her this before about his father, or maybe it was good fathering from himself that had to let her do it herself to find out. Paul says that his father was a criminal defence attorney. To champion civil rights was the idea when he went into it, to defend the oppressed, to connect with people. But that's not what happened, obviously. Our heighty moralistic view of something before we get into it from the outside. It's only when you're inside something you can truly see what it is. It's a problem we have today. We see that across Twitter and social media and everything else, is that people have opinions about shit that they actually know nothing about. And because that's on a side note, and because those voices are so loud, actually I think we're missing a lot of truth and understanding of different parts of our society today, including legal or health, obviously being a big one with COVID, trying to figure out what the truth is. So back to what I was saying. So Paul was saying, but all Paul ever saw about his father was a man struggling to deal with the idea that he helped put murderers back on the street. Isn't that the whole thing? You want to be a defense lawyer, you got to do your best for that person, whether they did it or not. Now, you can say that's right or wrong, but we have a legal system, or in Western society, or we try and have a legal system that puts the onus on the prosecution higher than on the defense, as it should be. Because it comes back to that question again. Do you want to have innocent people persecuted, killed even? We've had that before in an effort to make sure that the guilty are caught. Or do we have a system in place that tries to ensure that as many innocent people's lives are destroyed? I think we're getting away from that. We need to move back to having a proper process and system. Or not that we ever had a perfect one, or a good one. I think there needs a debate about it. Obviously, we're not having it. Not really. I don't know. Wish Al was here. We could discuss it more. We obviously will again as we go through the other episodes. But that's what Laurie is dealing with, by doing her job and doing the best of her job, doing her job at her best. Guilty people walk free, in this case a murderer. I think it takes a special strength to deal with that. And again, not everybody is up to that. So on to Denny. This really is the first episode where it kind of looks like Denny is properly forgetting stuff. Whether it was in the scene at the start, which was the second scene, whether at the boardroom, or at different points later on. He recovers well on 2 occasions. The second time actually being the court case, the opening, where he gets a mistrial. Very well acted by Mr. Shatner, but I'm biased. And then he wants to get the test done for Alzheimer's. Now, I could sit here and start talking about Alzheimer's, but I'm not, because it comes up later on. And there is an episode much later on which I think is one of the greatest episodes of dealing with that, with Alzheimer's. So myself and Al we'll be talking about that in much more detail later. The bit that really stuck to me was Denny asking, well, how does one know? How does a person know? But I suppose there's a deeper thing there now. How does any person know when there's something wrong? Unless we keep questioning ourselves and thinking about stuff and getting advice from the right people. Preferably not the doctor that the hypochondriac went. So, great episode, starting with a lot of humour. Humour continued all the way until we have our 2, as I said, balconies of truth, 2 honest moments at the end. Left on a serious, somber note. And left us with a lot of questions. So, hope you enjoyed my ramblings about that episode. Hope you got something out of it. Hope you enjoyed it. If I've missed anything, please let me know. There's a lot more going on there that I could have mentioned and talked about, but like I said, my email address is there. Get in touch. And yeah, so we'll be back next week. Alan should be back. So everyone stay safe. Have a good day. Like, share. You know what to do. Talk soon. Bye all. Stay safe. Sometimes